brave souls to a tale of destiny and dragons. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, young Erys holds the power to either save or doom his kingdom. With dark forces closing in and a prophecy that could change the fate of all, join us as we journey through epic battles, fierce magic, and the ultimate choice between light and darkness. Will Erys conquer his destiny, or will the world fall to ruin? Stay with us to find out, and don't forget to subscribe for more legendary adventures. Prophecy of the Dragon. Part 1. The Whisper of Fate. In the heart of the kingdom of Valeria, a land scarred by endless wars and darkened by the shadow of despair, there was a night unlike any other. The biting winter winds howled through the crumbling walls of the castle, carrying with them the whispered rumors of a prophecy as ancient as the stars themselves. It was a prophecy that spoke of a child born on the coldest night of the year, who would rise to become the dragon warrior, the one destined to either save or doom the world. Eleander, a knight of unwavering loyalty and unmatched valor, stood at the edge of the kingdom's northernmost tower, gazing out over the snow-covered expanse. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air, but his thoughts were a tempest within. The kingdom had long suffered under the yoke of warlords and dark sorcerers, each vying for power, each seeking to control the prophecy's outcome. The people of Ilaria, once proud and strong, now lived in fear, their hope dwindling with each passing day. But tonight, Eleander knew that the fate of the kingdom hinged on a fragile life, the life of a newborn child. The journey to the hidden village of Greyhearth, nestled deep within the Frostvale Mountains, had been perilous. Snowstorms and treacherous paths had tested Eleander's resolve, but he had pressed on, driven by the urgency of his mission. For within that village, on this very night, the child of prophecy was to be born. As the first cry of the newborn echoed through the modest stone cottage, Eleander knew his journey had only just begun. The midwife, a weathered woman with kind eyes, handed the swaddled infant to a trembling mother. Eleander approached, his armor clinking softly in the quiet room, and knelt before the child. "Young one," he whispered, his voice filled with reverence and trepidation. "You are the hope of this kingdom, the light that will guide us through the darkness." The mother, her face pale from exhaustion, looked at Eleander with fear in her eyes. "Will he be safe, Sir Eleander? Will you protect him?" "I swear it on my honor," Eleander replied, his hand resting gently on the hilt of his sword. "No harm shall come to him while I draw breath." Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cottage, there was a sense of peace. A fleeting moment of calm before the storm that was yet to come. Eleander knew that dark forces were already moving, drawn to the power that now resided in this tiny, fragile form. The prophecy had been set in motion, and with it, the fate of the world. As dawn broke over the frozen landscape, Eleander prepared to leave Greyhearth. The child cradled securely in his arms, he had no time to lose. The journey to the Sanctuary of Light, where the wise sorceress Seraphine awaited, would be long and fraught with danger. But it was a journey he had vowed to undertake, no matter the cost. For within the heart of this child, named Erys, lay the power to command the greatest force the world had ever known. A dragon of unparalleled might, a creature whose return had been foretold for centuries. But whether Erys would wield that power for good or evil was a question that weighed heavily on Eleander's mind. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, Eleander set out on his journey, unaware that he was being watched. From the shadows of the trees, a pair of eyes, cold and calculating, followed his every move. Morgan, the dark sorcerer, whose name was feared in every corner of the kingdom, had also heard the prophecy, and he would stop at nothing to claim the child and the dragon's power for himself. Part 2. The Dark Pursuit. The road from Greyhearth to the Sanctuary of Light was one few dared to travel. The path wound through dense forests, over icy rivers, and across barren plains, where the howls of wolves echoed like ghostly wails in the night. But Eleander pressed on, his every step driven by a sense of duty and a resolve forged in the fires of countless battles. Erys, still an infant, slept soundly in the knight's arms, unaware of the burden of destiny he carried. Eleander often found himself glancing down at the child, marveling at the innocence that could someday determine the fate of the world. He wondered what thoughts might be brewing behind those closed eyelids. What dreams might be stirring in a mind too young to comprehend the magnitude of its future. But there was little time for reflection. Eleander knew that Morgan's agents were already on their trail. The sorcerer's influence stretched far and wide, his minions lurking in every shadow, waiting to strike. The knight had encountered their kind before, merciless, relentless, and driven by an unwavering loyalty to their dark master. As the days passed, the journey became increasingly perilous. In the dead of night, as they made camp beneath the towering pines, Eleander heard the unmistakable sounds of pursuit. Branches snapping, the crunch of snow underfoot, and the low murmurs of voices that carried the promise of death. Eleander knew that confrontation was inevitable. On the 5th night, as the full moon cast an eerie glow over the frozen landscape, the moment arrived. They were ambushed. The attack came without warning. From the darkness, a volley of arrows rained down upon their camp. Eleander, ever vigilant, reacted with the swiftness of a seasoned warrior. He leaped to his feet, shielding Erys with his body as he drew his sword. The attackers emerged from the shadows. Morgan's mercenaries, clad in black armor that seemed to absorb the very light around them. Their leader, a towering figure with a scarred face and eyes that burned with malice, stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the moonlight. "Hand over the child, knight," the leader snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "And you may yet live." Eleander's grip tightened on his sword, his eyes narrowing. "You'll have to kill me first." "So be it," the leader hissed, raising his weapon. The battle that ensued was fierce and unforgiving. Eleander fought with the strength and skill of a man possessed, his blade flashing like a beacon in the night. He moved with deadly precision, cutting down his enemies one by one. His thoughts focused solely on protecting the child in his care. But the odds were against him. The mercenaries were many, and Eleander, though a warrior of unparalleled prowess, was but one man. Blood stained the snow as the battle raged on, the clashing of steel ringing through the forest like the tolling of a death knell. As Eleander fought, he caught a glimpse of the child lying on the ground, still swaddled in blankets, eyes wide with fear. The sight renewed his resolve. With a roar of defiance, Eleander drove his sword through the heart of the mercenary leader, who fell to the ground with a final, gurgling breath. But there was no time to savor the victory. More of Morgan's agents were surely on their way. Eleander sheathed his sword and scooped up Erys, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't continue on foot. They were too exposed, too vulnerable. Desperation drove him deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the shadows deeper. As dawn approached, Eleander stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance obscured by vines and fallen branches. It was here that he decided to take refuge, hoping the darkness would conceal them from their pursuers. Inside the cave, Eleander carefully placed Erys on a bed of soft moss, his mind racing. He had bought them some time, but how much? Morgan would not rest until the child was in his grasp. The knight's thoughts were interrupted by a soft, cooing sound. Erys was awake, his wide eyes staring up at Eleander with a curiosity that belied his tender age. Eleander knelt beside the child, his expression softening. "You're stronger than you look, little one," he murmured, brushing a lock of hair from the infant's forehead. "But we must be careful. Danger is all around us." As if in response, Erys reached out, his tiny hand wrapping around Eleander's finger. The night felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of purpose that renewed his determination. This child was more than just a prophecy. He was a beacon of hope, a chance for a future free from the darkness that plagued their world. But that future was far from certain. Morgan's shadow loomed ever closer, and Eleander knew that their journey was only beginning. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but it was a path they had to walk together. For in the end, the fate of Ilaria, and perhaps the entire world, rested in the hands of this small, fragile child. Part 3. The Sorceress's Sanctuary. The journey through the Frostvale Mountains was a grueling one, marked by bitter winds and treacherous terrain. Days turned into weeks as Eleander and Erys made their way toward the Sanctuary of Light, the hidden stronghold of the wise sorceress Seraphine. The mountains themselves seemed to conspire against them, with towering peaks and narrow passes that tested the limits of their endurance. But through it all, Eleander remained resolute. He had faced death before, but never had he carried such a heavy burden. The child, Erys, was more than just a responsibility. He was a symbol of hope in a world teetering on the brink of destruction. As they neared the sanctuary, the landscape began to change. The harsh, jagged peaks gave way to gentler slopes, and the icy winds softened, replaced by a gentle breeze that carried with it the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was as if the very air around them was infused with magic, a tangible reminder that they were entering a place of great power. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at the entrance to the Sanctuary of Light. The ancient stone gates, adorned with intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the twilight, stood as a testament to the wisdom and strength of the sorceress who dwelled within. Eleander approached the gates with a sense of reverence, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he knocked. The sound echoed through the mountains, and for a moment there was silence. Then, with a soft creak, the gates began to open, revealing a figure bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Seraphine, the sorceress of light, was a woman of striking beauty and ageless wisdom. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall, and her eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to see into the very soul of those who stood before her. She wore a robe of white and gold, embroidered with symbols of protection and power. "Eleander," she greeted, her voice gentle but firm. "You have done well to bring the child here." Eleander bowed his head in respect. "Lady Seraphine, the journey was long and perilous, but we have made it. I trust you will help guide him." Seraphine's gaze shifted to the child in Eleander's arms, and a soft smile touched her lips. "He is indeed the one spoken of in the prophecy, but his path is uncertain, and the forces that seek to control him are strong. I will protect him with my life," Eleander vowed. "You will need more than courage to face what lies ahead," Seraphine replied, her expression turning serious. "Come, there is much to discuss." Inside the sanctuary, the air was warm and filled with the soft glow of enchanted lanterns. The walls were lined with ancient tomes and scrolls, each containing knowledge that had been passed down through the ages. At the center of the room was a circular table, upon which rested a large, intricately carved crystal. "This is the heart of the sanctuary," Seraphine explained as she gestured to the crystal. "It holds the wisdom of all who have come before us. It will be of great use in training the child." Eleander placed Erys on a nearby cot, where the child quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the journey. Seraphine watched him for a moment before turning back to Eleander. "The power that lies within him is both a blessing and a curse," she said softly. "The dragon's spirit is ancient and wild, and if not properly controlled, it could bring about the very destruction the prophecy warns of." "And if it is controlled?" Eleander asked. "Then he could become the greatest force for good this world has ever known," Seraphine replied. "But the path to mastering such power is fraught with danger. Morgan will stop at nothing to claim it for himself." "Then we must prepare," Eleander said, determination in his voice. "What must I do?" Seraphine nodded. "You must stay here with us. Train alongside the child. Your bond with him will be crucial in the battles to come. Together, you will learn to harness the dragon's power, to use it for the good of all." Eleander agreed, his resolve unshaken. He would do whatever it took to protect Erys, to ensure that the prophecy was fulfilled in a way that would bring peace to Ilaria. But even as they began their training, the shadow of Morgan loomed ever closer. The dark sorcerer had not been idle. His spies had tracked Eleander and Erys to the sanctuary, and he was already making plans to strike. For Morgan knew that the key to controlling the dragon was not just in the child, but in the ancient magic that resided within the sanctuary of light itself. And he would stop at nothing to claim it. Part 4. Shadows of the Past. days at the Sanctuary of Light passed in a blur of training and study. Under Seraphine's guidance, Eleander and Erys learned to channel their inner strength, to harness the power that lay within them. For Eleander, it was a test of endurance and willpower. For Erys, it was a journey of discovery as he began to understand the magnitude of the destiny that awaited him. The boy's progress was remarkable. Though still a child, Erys showed an innate understanding of the magic that coursed through his veins. He was able to summon flames with a mere thought, to bend the very air around him to his will. But with each new power he discovered, the risk grew greater. Seraphine warned them of the dangers. The dragon's spirit is not easily tamed, she cautioned. It is a force of nature, wild and uncontrollable. If you lose control, even for a moment, the consequences could be disastrous. Erys listened intently, his young face serious beyond his years. He understood the weight of the responsibility he bore, even if he could not fully comprehend it. But there was something else, something that Seraphine had not yet revealed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sanctuary, Seraphine called Eleander to her chambers. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, and the flickering candles cast eerie patterns on the walls. "There is something you must know," Seraphine began, her voice low. "Something I have not told you about the prophecy." Eleander frowned. "What is it?" "The prophecy does not speak of one child, but two," Seraphine revealed. "Two children, born on the same night, one destined to bring peace, the other to bring destruction." Eleander felt a chill run down his spine. Two children, but where is the other? Seraphine sighed, her expression troubled. "The other child was taken by Morgan. He has been training him in the dark arts, preparing him to become the dragon's bane, the one who will bring about the end of the world." Eleander's heart sank. "Then, all this time, Morgan has been preparing for the final battle," Seraphine confirmed. "He intends to pit the two children against each other to see which will emerge victorious, and whichever one wins will control the dragon. We cannot allow that to happen," Eleander said, his voice filled with resolve. "We must find the other child. Stop Morgan before it's too late." "Finding the other child will not be easy," Seraphine warned. "He is hidden away, protected by powerful spells, but there may be a way to track him, a way to use the bond between Erys and the dragon to locate his counterpart." Eleander nodded. "We must try, for the sake of Valeria, for the sake of the world." Seraphine agreed, and they began to prepare for the next phase of their journey. It would not be easy, and the risks were great, but they had no choice. The fate of the world rested on their shoulders. As they set out from the sanctuary, Eleander couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Morgan was cunning, and he had likely anticipated their every move. But there was no turning back now. The journey ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. But Eleander was determined to see it through. For he knew that if they failed, the world would be plunged into an age of darkness from which it might never recover. And so, with Erys by his side and Seraphine's words of warning echoing in his mind, Eleander stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Part 5. The Final Confrontation. The journey to find the other child took them across the vast, war-torn lands of Ilaria. They passed through desolate villages, where the signs of battle were etched into the very earth. The people they encountered were wary, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. For the shadow of Morgan loomed large over the land. But Eleander, Erys, and their small band of allies pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency and purpose. The closer they got to Morgan's stronghold, the more palpable the tension became. It was as if the very air was charged with anticipation, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the outskirts of Morgan's fortress, a towering structure of black stone, surrounded by jagged cliffs and swirling mists. The fortress was a place of nightmares, a citadel of darkness, where no light could penetrate. Eleander knew that this was where the final battle would take place. Morgan was waiting for them, and so was the other child, the one who had been twisted and corrupted by the sorcerer's dark magic. As they approached the gates of the fortress, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Morgan himself, his presence as menacing as ever. He was tall and gaunt, with pale skin and eyes that gleamed with a malevolent light. His voice, when he spoke, was like the hiss of a serpent. "You have come far, knight," Morgan said, his tone mocking. "But your journey ends here. Did you really think you could defeat me? That you could stop what has been set in motion for centuries?" Eleander stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We came to stop you, Morgan. The prophecy doesn't have to end in destruction. There is still a chance for peace." Morgan's laugh echoed through the air, cold and hollow. "Peace. You speak of peace while you carry the instrument of the world's destruction in your arms. The dragon's power cannot be tamed, cannot be used for good. It is a force of chaos, and it will burn this world to ashes. Erys, standing beside Eleander, looked up at the dark sorcerer with wide eyes. His small hands clenched into fists. "I won't let you hurt anyone," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "I'll control the dragon. I'll protect everyone." Morgan's gaze shifted to the child, and for a moment, something akin to pity flickered in his eyes. "You are a fool, boy. The dragon spirit will consume you, just as it consumed all who came before you. But perhaps you will prove useful in my plans." With a wave of his hand, Morgan summoned the other child, Erys's counterpart, the one who had been raised in darkness. The boy stepped forward, his face a mirror of Erys's, but with eyes that burned with a dark fire. He was the dragon's bane, the one destined to bring about the world's end. Erys gasped as he saw the other child, feeling an inexplicable connection to him. It was as if they were two sides of the same coin, bound together by the threads of fate. Morgan smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "You see, Eleander, this is the true power of the prophecy. Two children, two paths, one of light, one of darkness. And now they will fight to determine the world's fate." Eleander drew his sword, ready to protect Erys at all costs. "This ends now, Morgan. We won't let you destroy everything." Morgan's eyes gleamed with malice. "Very well, Knight. Let the final battle begin." The air crackled with energy as Morgan's dark magic clashed with the light that emanated from Erys. The two children, bound by the prophecy, faced each other across the battlefield, their powers awakening in a storm of fire and lightning. Eleander fought with all his might, his sword a blur of motion as he struck down the dark creatures that Morgan summoned. But even as he battled, his gaze kept flickering to Erys, who was locked in a fierce struggle with his dark counterpart. The ground trembled as the power of the dragon began to awaken within both children, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Flames erupted from the earth, and the sky darkened as the forces of light and darkness clashed in a cataclysmic confrontation. Erys felt the dragon spirit rising within him, a force of raw power that threatened to consume him. But he remembered Seraphine's teachings, the lessons she had imparted during their time at the sanctuary. He focused on the warmth of the bond he shared with Eleander, the knight who had protected him since birth, and the strength of the light within him. "I won't let you win," Erys whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "I won't let this world be destroyed." The other child, the dragon's bane, snarled in response, his eyes filled with hatred and pain. You don't understand. This world is doomed, no matter what you do. The dragon's power will destroy everything. Erys shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose a different path. For a brief moment, the two children locked eyes, and something passed between them. A fleeting connection, a shared understanding of the burden they both carried. And in that moment, Erys made a decision. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his heart, extending the light within him to the other child. You don't have to be alone, Erys said softly. We can face this together. The dragon's bane hesitated, the darkness within him wavering as he felt the warmth of Erys's light. But Morgan's voice cut through the moment, sharp and commanding. No, destroy him. Fulfill your destiny. The other child's face twisted in anguish as he fought against the conflicting forces within him. But Erys's light was stronger, more powerful than the darkness that had been forced upon his counterpart. With a final, desperate cry, the dragon's bane unleashed all his power. But instead of striking Erys, he turned it inward, seeking to destroy the darkness within himself. The ground shook as the energy released in a blinding flash of light. And for a moment, it seemed as if the world itself was coming apart. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The dragon's bane lay on the ground, his eyes closed, his body still. Erys knelt beside him, tears in his eyes, but he knew that his counterpart had found peace at last. Morgan screamed in fury, his plans unraveling before him. You think you've won, boy. This isn't over. But Eleander was ready. He raised his sword, the blade glowing with the power of the dragon, and with a single decisive strike, he brought it down upon Morgan. The dark sorcerer's scream echoed through the night as his form disintegrated, consumed by the very darkness he had sought to wield. The fortress began to crumble, the black stone turning to dust as the last remnants of Morgan's power faded into nothingness. Eleander rushed to Erys's side, pulling the boy into his arms as the fortress collapsed around them. It's over, he whispered, holding Erys close. It's finally over. But Erys shook his head, looking down at the still form of the other child. No, it's not over. Not yet. The dragon's power still lingered in the air, a force of immense energy that threatened to spiral out of control. Erys knew that he had to make a choice that would determine the fate of the world. He closed his eyes, focusing on the bond he shared with the dragon. It was a creature of both light and darkness, a being of immense power bring either salvation or destruction. But Erys understood now that the dragon was not an enemy. It was a part of him, a part of all living things. With a deep breath, Erys extended his hand, reaching out to the dragon's spirit. He felt the warmth of its presence, the raw, untamed energy that surged through him, and he knew what he had to do. "I choose peace," Erys whispered, his voice steady and calm. The dragon's power responded, swirling around him in a brilliant display of light. The flames that had once threatened to consume the world were now a beacon of hope, a symbol of the choice Erys had made. As the light enveloped him, Erys felt the dragon's spirit merge with his own, becoming one with the very essence of his being. The power that had once been a source of fear and destruction was now a force for good, a force that would protect the world for generations to come. When the light finally faded, the fortress was gone, and the sky was clear. The stars shone brightly above, and the air was filled with a sense of peace and calm that had not been felt in Ilaria for centuries. Eleander looked down at Erys, who stood beside him, his eyes glowing with the light of the dragon. The boy smiled, his face serene and content, and Eleander knew that the world was in safe hands. Together, they turned and walked away from the ruins of the fortress, leaving the past behind and stepping into a future filled with hope and possibility. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way anyone had expected. The dragon warrior had not brought destruction, but peace. A peace that would endure for all time. And so, the legend of the dragon warrior and the choice he made would be passed down through the ages, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, and that the power to change the world lies within the hearts of those who choose to believe in the light. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Years had passed since the day Erys made his choice. The kingdom of Ilaria had flourished in the peace that followed, the scars of war slowly healing as the people rebuilt their lives. Eleander, now an older man, stood on the balcony of the castle, overlooking the bustling city below. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music, a far cry from the fear and despair that had once gripped the land. Beside him stood Erys, no longer a child, but a young man, wise beyond his years. The light of the dragon still burned within him, but it was a light that brought warmth and life, not destruction. "You did well, Erys," Eleander said, his voice filled with pride. "You brought peace to this world, just as you promised." Erys smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "You were with me every step of the way." Eleander nodded, his heart swelling with affection for the boy he had come to love as a son. "And I always will be, as long as I draw breath." As the first rays of dawn touched the land, bathing it in golden light, Erys felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but he knew that as long as there were those who believed in the light, the world would never be consumed by darkness. The dragon's spirit, once a force of fear and destruction, had become a symbol of hope and renewal, a reminder that even in the face of the greatest challenges, the power to shape the future lies within the choices we make. And so, as the sun rose on a new day, Erys and Eleander stood together, ready to face whatever the future might bring, their hearts filled with the light of the dragon and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.